Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt totally stuck in the same relationship patterns no matter how much you try to change? Like you know something isn't working, but you don't know why or how to fix it. Hello, that's me. And in this episode, we are going deep into it. I had the absolute gift of sitting down with Dr. Nima Rahmany, an attachment specialist, and let me tell you, this one gets personal, of course. Dr. Nima doesn't just talk about healing attachment wounds, he actually walks me through my own attachment issues in real time. We talk about becoming trigger proof, setting boundaries, healing from enmeshment and codependency, my favorite, and how our nervous system keeps us stuck in cycles we didn't even realize we were in. If you've ever felt emotionally dysregulated in relationships, hello, who hasn't, or struggled with anxious or avoidant attachment, or even wondered why certain things trigger you so much, you have to listen to this episode. So grab your coffee, get cozy, and let's dive in. And this episode is brought to you by How We Get Woo. We just launched and we are beyond excited to build a community around non-traditional healing with a touch of magic. So if you're needing a supportive community to get through those retrogrades and connect with your purpose, then join the How We Get Woo community today. The link's in the show notes. Welcome or welcome back to How We Get Through, where we heal, we expand, and we get through together. Welcome back to the How We Get Through podcast. We have a special episode. We have attachment specialist Dr. Rahmany on the show. Did I say it right?
Yes. But what I notice is like there is a psychotherapist on YouTube named Dr. Rahmany Dursavala or whatever,
That's
and I
not
like
you.
to distinguish myself from her. So you can just call me Dr. Nima.
Dr.
So
Nima.
just call me Nima, and completely different, but similar type of outcomes that we want is healing and growth and secure relationships, but we
Yeah.
kind of approach it from a different angle.
Yes. And that's why I'm so excited to have you on today, because if you have not checked out Dr. Nima's Instagram, you have to, because the way that you approach attachment is so different than I've seen it. And I'm a therapist, right? So I'm very excited to dive into your brain and how you view attachment and healing, because I think it's very unique and special. So excited to have you on.
Thank you. My approach is different because I'm not a therapist. I'm a nervous system specialist. I've been a chiropractor for 20 years. So the cool part about it is most of my clients have been going to therapy for years, and they appreciate the approach that I have is because I approach it from a nervous system perspective, because I'm a nervous system specialist. And so uh, as I the approach that I have in my healing comes very globally from a nervous system component. So it is kind of unique. And also the fact that I left chiropractic because I had to learn how to become my own medicine. Um, and I was going through my own relational challenges that I kind of like my mess became my message. So the work actually lives in my bones. So it's not from a clinical education, from a psychotherapeutic education perspective, it's actually from a lived experience and nervous system specialist.
And what a way to teach the world, right? When you've lived it, when you've experienced it, there's trust, there's knowing. And then what's beautiful about that is that some people get stuck there, or some people teach out of that. And so I'm so excited to have you
Yeah.
today. Can you tell me a little bit about how you came to be here? Like,
Yeah.
what's your trauma?
Yeah. What's your trauma? Well, here I am, a chiropractor who loves being a chiropractor, patients coming in with stress related issues primarily. And I notice some of them are getting better, and some of them are just no matter what we throw at them, they just aren't improving. And I would, as the 10, 20 years of my profession were advancing, just ask anyone who works as a body worker for more than 10 years, they will tell you that there is a mind-body connection that's impacting somebody's level of health and healing. So in my own personal growth journey, everything that I would learn about cognitive methods to change my perspective so that I could release the burden of stress from my system, I would always teach that to my patients. And back in 2009, about 5 to 10 years into my um, practice, I started creating these workshops called Life Skills for a Stressful World, where I would say, look, as you're coming in for your chiropractic care, come to my workshop and I'm going to teach you some skills so that you're not carrying the burdens of life so heavily, which is impacting your healing, right? And so I started noticing that the patients that were coming to these workshops would get better faster. And I
Wow.
started enjoying working with them more because they took more of a responsibility on their healing journey rather than, "Hey, doc, fix me," right? I didn't like working with that type of person. And so as my career developed, I went through a divorce and then a series of 8 or 9 failed relationships, all coming to the exact same outcome, which was me kind of moving away and wanting connection, but then feeling overwhelmed and pulling away and feeling this sense that they were always so needy, right? And it wasn't until my last relationship that started in 2016. It was a 4-year relationship that just blew up in 2018 and it became volatile and it became abusive. And I actually became abusive. I was like, how did that even happen? To the point where these hands were used to heal people were then used to actually hurt the woman I'm supposed to love. I had to figure out what I was missing. So I stopped working altogether. I just was like, I got to figure this out. And that's when I dove into the world of attachment trauma, of the polyvagal theory, of shadow work, of healing with the younger parts of myself, parts work, inner child, all of these nervous system regulation work. And then I started studying somatic experiencing, all for the sake of trying to get to the bottom of how did I react the way that I did? Somebody who's intelligent, who has an education, who really helps people in a moment of activation of a getting triggered can then turn into something else. I had to figure out why. And so that journey to understanding how to expand that space between stimulus and response and find out all of the nervous system, shenanigans that happen between that space, stimulus and response and reaction. There was no space. It was just stimulus and reaction. I had to learn how to expand that space. And this is where the concept of becoming trigger proof was born. And I learned how to heal my attachment wounds. I learned how to become trigger proof. I learned how to interrupt the pattern of fawning and people pleasing. I learned how to find safety and security within my own body and become a secure individual. And I thought, okay, if I can figure out how that happened, can make sure that it never happens again and see if I can create a secure relationship, which I did. I got married. We have a 5-year-old son. If I can do that, then number 4, my karma needs to become my dharma, my sacred path, my purpose, which is to teach others how to go from insecure, anxious attachment, avoid and attach, which I was. I first started out understanding my attachment style. What is my attachment style? That was my starting point, but not the ending point. It's just the beginning, the base camp. And when I learned that and I moved to an earn secure, my relational dynamics completely shifted. I felt safe and trusting within myself. And I got married. I thought something that I never thought I would ever do again because I had written off relationships. And now I realize that the greatest personal growth that we can do is to become secure in ourselves, so that we can contain a healthy and secure relationship, so that our homes become a sanctuary rather than a battlefield, because that's how it passes down to the next generation. So the highest form of growth to me is creating a secure relationship. And um, it's one of the most difficult things and most challenging things to do, but it's a sign of a healthy and mature individual if you can create that at home. And that's what I'm dedicated to teaching people how to do. I stand for healed families, and that's the work that I do now.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I'm just like, yeah, cheering you on in the background. Um, I love the idea of trigger proof. Can you kind of really explain that? Does that mean you never get triggered again, or it's when you get triggered?
I wrote a book actually. It's coming out in September. It's called Becoming Trigger Proof. And I say only 100 times in the book, trigger proof does not mean trigger less. The moment that you get activated, something happens within your nervous system and you react and you regress into a childlike state. Anytime there's a reactivity, there's a wound. And so I want to kind of preface this by helping redefine the word trauma. And trauma is not what happens to us, right? It's what's happening inside of us, within us, without a safe and empathetic witness to help us process. Right? So it's not just physical abuse, it's not just sexual abuse. I didn't understand, but trauma is me being separated from my mother for 3 months at the age of 2 when I had activation in my nervous system, but I didn't have a uh, an empathetic witness to help me bring it back to safety. And what happens is that energy gets stored in the body and it isn't processed. And what happens is we then go through life and we run into experiences where it reminds us of just like when that time that energy is stuck in our body. And in the moment it gets triggered, we are no longer in the present moment. We are now back in that childlike state, reliving what had happened. And so without doing the work of becoming trigger proof, we start to avoid those things that make us uncomfortable because the sensations are too great. We don't have capacity to be able to contain that energy that arises. We don't know what to do with it. We either stuff it down or we act it out, and there's 4 responses to this trauma. There's fight, which is poking. There's flight, which is running away. There's freeze, which is hiding. Or number 4, there's fawning, which is kind of like appeasing, right? It's like the childlike self, in order to survive, had to fight, had to flight, which we all know about, but very few understand the freeze response when running was too dangerous, or fighting back was too dangerous. So you just had to sit there and play dead to survive, much like a zebra that's getting chased by a tiger in the Serengeti and then gets, caught, then just plays dead. Hopefully it calms the predator down and they go off and get their friends or family, and that buys them just enough time to escape. That's the function of the freeze response. And a very, very poorly understood one is called the fawn response. It's when you appease the predator, when you with the perceived predator, and you play nice, and you are just to kind of calm the system down of the predator to save your life. These trauma responses are attachment distress responses during attachment stress, during arguments, during ruptures in relational dynamics, which caused us to survive in childhood. But unfortunately, in your intimate partnerships, without doing the deep somatic inner work, those childhood protective responses absolutely create havoc in our intimate partnerships. And oftentimes, an avoidant, somebody who responds to attachment distress by running and hiding, matches up with an anxious attached who
Yes.
during attachment distress goes into criticism and blame. And so this becomes a perfect storm of triggers where they get activated and they go into their wound, which then feeds the other person. And it becomes absolutely a cluster, F.
Yes. You can say
And
fuck.
you can. Okay, cool. So it becomes a clusterfuck. And so trigger proof does not mean trigger less. It means owning where I am at the starting point, getting humble and realizing that the reactivity and the responses that caused me to survive childhood was brilliant. Thank you. However, if I want to have a relationship that feels safe and secure, I've got to do the work to rewire that conditioning. Otherwise, I can leave this relationship and get a divorce, sure. But without rewiring that, guess what happens in the next relationship?
Same
You
shit.
attract the exact same dynamic and you go through what I call the infinite loop of doom, where the anxious person starts to chase, which then causes the avoidant to push away and go, it's overwhelming, and they need to run and hide, which then causes more of an activation, which then causes more an avoidance, which it's then, and so many people are struggling with this and they don't have to. And trigger proof does not mean trigger less. It means responding differently, working on that muscle, rewiring the conditioning that's in your body. It's not even conscious. Like, you can listen to this podcast and hear me say that and go, "Okay, okay, I'll remember for next time." But still, the second that you get activated, your prefrontal cortex goes offline and you regress to that childlike state. So without going back and reparenting and finding that child, without bringing safety and giving that child what they did not receive, you will continuously react as that child and identify as that child, and you can't have a secure relationship and in your adulthood reacting like a child.
I feel like this is a big issue around the world in many relationships. And this was an issue in my relationship when you were like avoidant anxious. I was like, this is it. This is it.
Were you the anxious or the avoidant?
Of course. Or the anxious. Come on.
I'm a therapist. Of course I was the anxious.
Yes. Come on. And
Come on.
the avoidant, I was like, it's fine. I can fix this. I'm gonna do this.
Mm.
This is gonna be great. But it's interesting when you talk about flight, fight, freeze, and fawn. In your experience, have you seen people do multiple responses or they start because I'm like, I think I flight and then I fawn,
Yeah.
how does that work?
It depends. It depends on the dynamic between the two people. So, if I'm in a relationship with somebody who I'm the overdog and I'm like, I I see myself as more empowered than this person, then I'm probably gonna fight. I'm gonna stand up for myself. I'm gonna say, "No, I'm not taking your shit." You pick that shit up, like, you're going to be a fighter. And let's say that exact same person goes to work and now they depend on this job and this salary and they have a boss. And the boss starts saying whatever, and then this person who is a fighter in that dynamic will be a fawner and go, "Sure, whatever you say. Absolutely. Sure, I'll come in on Saturdays and work. Sure, I'll work all weekend. Absolutely. Sure, I'll come and help you move. And yeah, sure, sure, absolutely. You can have your family come and stay at my place. No problem. That same person who was a fighter in one dynamic will be a fawner in another. So we are a multiplicity of parts. You are not just a one sided being. And in different dynamics between the two people, you could be a narcissist in one relationship and you be the codependent in another. So we are not one entity. And part of the training of becoming trigger proof is really about seeing and understanding the multiplicity of parts that we have. We all have kind of like a multiple personality type of thing going on. We all have it, right? We just haven't learned how to bring our executive center, our president, our CEO online so that it can kind of manage all of these various protective parts of us. So this is the work and rewiring to bring the higher self, the adult self online. And that space creates secure relationships. That person does not tolerate abusive behavior or being gaslit or tries too hard to be loved and worthy and prove their worth. That person knows their worth and doesn't try to push, doesn't try to change anyone, is secure and just like, okay, cool. We're not a match. That's cool. And you're able to flow your energy away without having to chase. That chase energy comes from an unresolved wound. And so becoming trigger proof brings this adult self online where you become secure in yourself. And that's really what my journey was, and I love showing that to other people.
Hmm. Would you say that in your experience, most women are the chasers?
Great question. I I would say, yeah, I would say about 80-20.
Okay.
But here's the thing that's neat. It's not universal. Like, I've worked with women who were the chasers, and they're like, I got to heal this anxious attachment. It's just really, really shitty having to constantly be in waiting energy all the time. I'm constantly blaming him. I'm ready to do the work and become secure, even if he's not ready to do it. I'm like, okay, good. Because, it's like when you have a couple, two people, and in a marriage, and both are like 200 pounds overweight. And ideally, both people will start to do the healing work and lose the weight, right? But does it always happen that way? No. Are you going to wait for one to do it? You going to wait for them to join you or not? And so it's like, no, I'm going to do it regardless. And one person loses the weight. Can you see that that's going to shift the dynamic between the two? Right. So this is exactly what happens. So she comes in and she will start to work on her anxious attachment and become more secure and heal the parts of her that feel like she's not enough, that need to chase on the outside. She starts seeing that she is and realizes, oh my God, what am I chasing? I can do so much better. And all of a sudden, she becomes the distancer and he starts to chase. Right? So we're not set in stone. Your attachment style is not set in stone, and it depends on so many factors, and the dynamic between the two people are relevant. And so any area, if you empower all areas of your life, you become more secure and more magnetic, and you become the chooser rather than hoping to be chosen. So it's an inner game.
Yeah. Which is so interesting, because I'm going through a divorce right now, but that's been going on for like a year and a half. And I feel like I started really loving myself or focusing on myself more. And then that became more apparent of like the split between the two of us. And I feel like I became a little bit more avoidant of like going towards him. And he also is avoidant and would kind of move away. So it became this like weird space where we were avoiding this big thing that was happening in our relationship. And I kept kind of bringing it to the table, but then also not wanting him to hurt. And so I felt codependent in that. Like it was just so much. Like I was like, none of this is clear. None of this feels easy. And I'm cycling through so many things that I'm confused.
Yeah. So when you started to find that sense of self again, um, you was he trying to approach you and you were avoiding, or you just wanted solitude and you realized that this wasn't a match and you gave up trying?
Yes, the latter. Even though I would still bring it because I was still in a relationship, like we still needed to talk about what was happening. But that I think was very difficult for him. And so he kept like, he just did more things for me instead of emotionally coming.
So what happens is avoiding shame. I want you to see avoidant as shame and failure avoidance. And so, let's say I'm your husband and you're coming to me with whatever problems that you're having. Because I was raised in an environment where my emotions were not seen, were not held, were not validated, I had to go off and be an island and deal with it myself because I was never modeled that, hey, your emotions are valid. Maybe even I was treated in a way where, like, suck it up, and I was shamed for having emotions. So I will respond by stuffing them down or kind of withdrawing so that I can avoid them. And anything that brings me some sort of feeling of pain, of failure, I just keep avoiding. And so if I'm with you and you're bringing it up, you're saying, I'm hurting, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling that. I don't have in that moment as your husband the capacity to go, oh, Jen, tell me how you're feeling. Wow. Tell me what you need. There's no experience like that. So, what I'll do is I start to feel your emotions and they will feel like a bother to me because I was a bother to someone.
Mhm.
Right? So I
Yes.
will then project that bother onto you. And then every time I look at you, I will be reminded of my own failure that I don't want to deal with. So I don't even want to be in a conversation with you to talk about it because I that means that I'm going to have to feel things like failure and I'm going to work and do and develop an identity to do everything I can so that I never have to deal with these parts of me that feel like a failure.
Yes, but the problem is that I knew all of that.
Okay?
So what I did with that was said, Don't worry, I'm gonna fix you."
Bingo. Okay. Now, this is where it
My
comes
shit.
down to you, right?
Yes.
This is where your side of the street comes in, right? And so the question that Jen gets to ask is what, where did I learn that I was responsible for fixing somebody else's emotions, for taking on that, which by the way, every therapist,
Yeah.
that's why we're therapists, is because we learned that behavior growing up where mom and dad's emotions, in order for us to feel safe, we had to go and take the burden on so that we could then feel safe. And then I can feel important. Then we get a pat on the back. Good girl, Jen. Jen, you're such a helper. Wow, you're so amazing. So you get this identity validated. And so unconsciously, you have this concept to repeat what was familiar in childhood, the repetition compulsion. Even if you're a therapist, right, you're still going on these unconscious programs where you're now putting yourself in a familiar environment where I get to repeat my role from childhood. So there's one part of you that loves it, and then this other part of you that's like, I really want to receive. I want to be in my feminine. I don't want to mother. I don't want to be a mother anymore. I want to feel fulfilled. And now I want to receive. So now, Jen, your journey gets to be learning how to receive from the masculine, which is very, very weird to your system, isn't it? The concept of you receiving from a healthy masculine will feel like, ugh, because I like that role, because I can be in control of that. Letting go of control and being led, ooh, that's scary. And so that gets to be your work on your next phase of the journey.
Well, let me try it. I mean, come on over. Let me see how it goes. No, but I do it's so interesting because that is what became confusing in some ways of like, okay, I stopped working on him. I stopped trying to fix him and I was like, what the fuck is happening with me? Like,
You
this is
changed a
not okay.
step in the familiar dance.
Yes. But then when we come together, it just felt like the same thing and I couldn't understand where the emotional boundary was of not hurting someone or taking on his pain. So then I must oh, I'm going to cry. So then I must like leave my pain. And so I think that was like the hardest part of like should I stay or should I go? I was like what's my pain and
Yeah.
what's
What about
his
me?
pain?
Yeah,
Yeah, and how do I like, all I want is to be seen and loved in a relationship, right?
totally.
And we all do. And I realized that I had to see and love myself and then ask if my partner can do that. And
And sometimes that's the hardest thing. Once you see that, you change the step in the dance and you're like, oh, it's not that he's a bad person. He just doesn't have the capacity. And so the guilt, what you're experiencing right now, thank you for your vulnerability, by the way. So
I
beautiful.
cry all the time.
That's cool. That's all good. I love it. You and I could be such good friends. So
I know.
totally, like already, I love you. Um, what you were experiencing there, Jen, is called guilt. And guilt is the price of admission for breaking that cycle. Be- Guilt is the price of admission. It's literally, this is why people stay stuck in the should I stay or go? Because, and this is what my book, I call the book, it's called A Villain's Journey because you
Ooh.
have to be willing to be the bad guy in the other person's story who sees you as their mother and right now and so how dare my mother abandon me again. I bet you he's experiencing that again. That's his spiritual journey, that he felt abandoned by his mother, so he gets to repeat that and you abandoned him again. Again, his story. I'm not
Yes.
projecting
Yes.
that onto you. I'm just saying I understand every narrative coming around because I've been working around these narratives so long. It's like your job is to break free from that childhood. It's like like a shell, like a lobster molting out of its shell into a new identity where you're not responsible for everybody and you get to receive. And when you develop into that, you get to look and see, hey, this is what I want. Are you wanting to come with me? And and the answer is no. Now, it's not definitely no, because he could all of a sudden experience the pain of abandonment and then go, all right, I got to look at something and start to do his path of becoming trigger proof and then realize, holy crap, this is what I was doing. I was not able to hold space. So if he was to do his work, he could easily come back and go, Jen, I never held space. I made you responsible for everything. And I was doing, and I thought my worthiness of love was all about what I was doing for you rather than who I was being for you. And I'm learning how to do that now. And that can be repaired, but not everybody's up for the task, are they?
I mean, you I'm gonna cry again. But, like, you just even saying that, like, is so,
Validating.
yeah,
I get
and you're
it.
not even the person that fucked me over, you know?
I know.
I'm not even in the dynamic with you. But I think that, again,
I
speaks to
see
the
you.
power of acknowledging and owning your own shit in any relationship.
But Jen, in order to do that, I have to sit in my shame. In order for me to do what I just did for you there, let's say I'm your husband. In order for me to do that, I have to go and sit and realize the shame of my unconsciousness. And it's very shameful that the work of becoming trigger proof basically means going into all of these dark shadow parts of you that you did not know. It's not your fault, but bringing them to light and sitting in the awareness of, oh my God, I abandoned myself. How did I abandon myself? I feel so much guilt. I feel so much shame. And sit and alchemize it. The pain must burn through your soul. And on the other side of that is an opening, is an understanding. And that journey into the abyss of that pain is one many men are very afraid to do. They'll Firefighters will run into a fucking burning building, no problem. But to sit in the pain of their shame, hells to the no.
Yeah, yeah.
There is no way. So I really love holding space for people. That's what I do in my overview experience. I basically hold that space for people so that they can move through that, and it's painful, but on the other side is this sense of freedom. Is like, okay, well, I don't have to hate on those parts of me anymore. They didn't know any better. I was just conditioned. I was conditioned. It was never my fault. It wasn't even my parents' fault. And this is what becoming a cycle breaker is all about, is so that I can model this to my child so that he doesn't have to carry the burden of my unprocessed shame.
Yeah. Which is the other part is parenting. I mean, I have 2 kids, and
How old
they're,
are they?
6 and sorry, soon to be 7 and 5.
Wow. I got
Yeah.
a 4-year-old. So, Jen, to go through all of that, big ups to you, sister, and to be so, you know, I see you're such a kind soul and you're so playful and you must, you're such a
Just made me
lovely
cry.
human being. I got so much love for you just
Thank
from hearing
you.
that. As a mom too, having to go through that, big love to you, sister.
Thank you. I appreciate that because that is hard to, there's no abuse, there's no, it's not traumatic, but it just wasn't clicking, it just,
There was a lack of emotional attunement. You
yeah.
weren't being met emotionally, and that's not your fault, and that's not even his fault. He doesn't know what he doesn't know. His thought probably, because 'cause I'm just channeling into the avoidant man, because I work with both, is that, "What do I gotta do to make her happy? I just gotta do," and it's not about doing, it's about who you're being for me, and witnessing me, right? But if he can't witness himself, there's no way he can witness you. So your work becomes to witness you and make the really painful decision that you made, which is the guilt. I could feel the guilt. Like
It's
you were
bad.
crying, just like, oh
Yeah.
my God, I'm going to have to hurt this person because I can see the innocence of his attempt. He's just stuck in like 8 years old, 12 years old, and he can't grow with me. And I don't, I want him to, but he's not willing. And you're ready to kind of walk away to do that. Right. And so that's, that's, that's the work. That's the work.
Yeah, and I feel like I've worked through most of it, but now, like, I'm gonna be moving out very soon and, like, things are getting real. Oh, no. It's an eclipse right now when we're recording this.
Totally.
But I'll also, like I just, like, try to talk about these things, and I just see him as, like I'm kicking a puppy, you know, and I'm just like,
Right.
"God," like,
Yeah.
I can't.
His nervous system is in dorsal, probably like a dorsal vagal shutdown. He's in distress and he's not even connected to his body. He doesn't
Yes.
know, he likely does not know what's happening. It's like, have you ever seen the video of the still faced experiment?
Yes, with the baby?
Yes.
Yeah.
Everybody who's listening has to YouTube still faced experiment, Dr. Tronick or Tronk or whatever, Tronick. And it's this experiment that they do where they see infants um, 1 years old, right? And they have this mother who's engaging with the child, the little girl, and she's there. And then all of a sudden, they ask the mother to turn around and then come back and then
Stone face.
completely still face. And then within literally 30 to 45 seconds, this baby is trying to connect emotionally, but there's just no emotion, and the baby is it's traumatic. This is trauma. It's not a physical abuse. Like I said, it's not sexual abuse. It's actually a lack of emotional attunement, and this child is just freaking out, and then finally, th they jump out of she jumps out of it, "Okay, I'm back," and then causes repair, and the baby, boom, the nervous system comes right back to safety, and it's like, wow, how many parents raise their children in a stuck nervous system dissociated state where there's no it's not that there's not love, there's just they're not connected in their bodies. And especially since what happened with COVID, we have a population of people who are dysregulated from their nervous systems. They are completely like frozen, and there's no smiling, there's no laughter, there's no humor, there's no feeling in the body. They've left their body because there's so much pain in the body. They leave and they go up in their heads and they do. It's not their fault. But what happens is you can't feel them. It's like talking to a brick wall, right? And so with my clients, I get them to take photos when they first begin the program with me. And you see that still face like you're describing. And then after about 4 to 6 months, they take another picture and it's like the life force energy has come back into their body. And so when you're talking to him, it's like what I'm seeing about you, you're the little baby and he's the
Mhm.
still
Oh,
face,
yes.
right? So big love to that. But then also compassion towards the mothers who are still faced because they're emotionally dead because of their dysregulation, and to your husband because he's stuck in a frozen state and that's not his fault.
Yeah, and I can see myself, like, "How are you feeling? What are you thinking?" Like, "Are you okay? Am I, like, shanking you in the side emotionally?" Like, I it's the brick wall is so scary for me in some ways, and it gets me a little frantic, and so I've had to really kind of, like, not care because I care, but I'm like, "I can't ask you how you're feeling or what you're doing, and I have to disconnect that I am making this happen for you." Because I took so much blame and guilt around it that, like, is heavy. It's so heavy when you're in a relationship with someone else. So, it's still my work to, like, pull back from that, and I don't know if that is, like, codependence in some way? Okay,
100%.
great.
It's called enmeshment. The word is called
Enmeshment.
enmeshment. It's that my safety depends on you being safe. There's no boundary, there's no separation between their emotions and yours, and most people unwittingly go into relationships that way, right? Is that person's feelings, there's no boundary between their emotions and yours, and you take responsibility. Your sense of safety comes in abandoning yourself and taking care of the other. And so this dynamic is codependency, and it is doomed to absolute chaos, and this is why people have health issues. It causes chronic illness. It's so rampant. I believe that this is enmeshment trauma, and codependency is a pandemic. And so I'm really keen on breaking that cycle, and it takes heroic amount of effort to be able to sit in your guilt and the shame for feeling like you're being the bad guy. So this is your willingness to be seen as the bad guy. You're expanding your capacity to be seen as the villain in someone else's story is your ticket to freedom.
Yeah. Which I was illuminated for me in the way that his family responded to me. And I was like, "No, no, 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 I'm not the bad guy. I'm not the bad. This is we are friendly. We're doing this, blah blah." And they just were like, "Nope, you are done from us and you can never return." And I was like, and I blamed him for that. And I was like, "What do you mean this is happening?" And
Yeah.
I think that was the
Why aren't
trap.
you backing me up?
Yes.
Why don't you have my back, right?
Right. But also, like, how can I ask you to have my back when I am also hurting you? You know? Like, it was just such a trap of, like, I have to land on a camp of, like, I'm not gonna be your best friend and your savior. And even when you talk about it to other people, I will be a villain or I will be, you know, like, praised for leaving, and it's like, whatever.
Yep. This is the classic trauma bond. Well, I mean, but it's not an extreme because there's not heavy volatility, but it's kind of like a light one, but it's classic codependency. And it's two people that have no idea. It's intergenerational, you know, and these are childhood roles that you both are working through. And you're basically, part of the work then is to break free from mom and dad. So if you as you're going through this, as I'm guiding people through, I really make sure that you gotta make sure that you divorce mom and dad first before divorcing this person, because if you don't do that, the next person, you're gonna be back to the same dynamic because you haven't divorced from mom and dad.
What does that mean?
Individuation is a concept that Carl Jung, came up with, and he basically says healing is a matter of individuating, is that deep down, we have this desire and our survival depends on belonging to a tribe. So what we do unknowingly is that we push aside and abandon parts of ourselves if we feel that it's not going to be accepted by the tribe. Right? It's like if I'm raised in a cult, for example, and I'm like, okay, I don't know if I believe in all this shit, right? But and this is an extreme example, but if I speak up and say, wait, this is a bunch of bullshit,
You're out.
what's gonna happen? I'm gonna get kicked out, and that's a threat to me. So what am I gonna
Mm,
do? I'm gonna be like, yes, yes, oh yeah, I totally believe in all this stuff, right?
right.
So you will abandon yourself for a sake of belonging. That becomes a wiring, that becomes a conditioning, that becomes an identity you don't even know. It's worse than an addiction. It's just who you are. So I'm using the extreme example just to show that we're all a little bit of that. We're all in a gradient or a spectrum of that, aren't we? So that could be a religious cult, or it could be just, hey, I want to be an engineer. No, you don't. Your dad wanted you to be an engineer, right? So it's like this desire to belong, right, so that I could have the validation and the love and the care and the acceptance of my caregivers. And then at some point, if that experience growing up was that if I choose my authentic self, my desires, my values, my whatever, and that goes against them, what is the response from my caregivers? If they withdraw love, I'm going to abandon myself. So after I abandoned myself enough in my 20s, in my 30s, everybody starts. This is where the midlife crisis comes in because
Mm,
how old are you, Jen?
40.
Ah, there we go.
But I look
Perfect.
young, right?
This is it. Okay, so perfect timing. So here we go, and I'm
Saturn's
just
return.
only listen. I can't judge. I was exactly there. I'm only 10 years. I'm like 9 years ahead of you. So I've gone
Okay,
through all of
great.
this.
Tell me
So
everything.
I'm like I'm giving you the playbook here, sister.
I love it. I
I got the
receive
pl-
it.
I got the playbook here. So what happens is our duty, this is we are all summoned. You are summoned to this. Your mission, should you choose to accept it or not. But this was my mission, was to say, all right, I want to be this. But in order to claim this, it's going to feel a sense of threat to my parents. What are they going to think? Because if I choose my authentic self, they're not going to like it. And so there's this war of approval that we're trying to fight. And when we chase external approval, we abandon ourselves. So individuation means breaking free from the invisible chains of mommy and daddy upbringing, cultural approval, to take the risk of being our authentic selves, expressing our authentic truth. Think of, somebody who's gay growing up in the deep South, who's been hiding it and then gets sick until they finally go, no, this is who I am. And then certain people are like, I don't want to speak to you anymore. Right? It's like they had to make a choice knowing that by choosing their authentic self, they're going to lose people, but they will not ever go on abandoning themselves anymore. This is the process of individuation. And so our job is to do that with mom and dad. So I've created a process. I've created a process where I guide people through the process of individuation, which is really about healing from mom, healing the mother wound, and healing the father wound, so that you take them off the pedestal or the monster pedestal of whatever you have them on, that they're evil, and you see them as human. And you're able to accept them as exactly who they were and appreciate them exactly for who they were, yet choosing your truth and your own identity fully, unapologetically. And that's the only way to healing. And from a chronic illness perspective, if you don't do chronic illness, I believe, is your body screaming at you to choose your authentic self.
Oof. Oof.
Right?
That
It's
hits. Yeah.
chronic illness is I am so done with people pleasing. Like think of all the times where you took responsibility, you abandoned yourself to care for the other. Your body goes into a constriction and creates inflammation, and you keep going. I guarantee you, if you kept going at that dance for another 10 years, you would have thyroid issues. You would have you would
Hashimoto's.
you would have Hashimoto's. You would have digestive issues, chronic bowel disorders, inflammatory bowel, endometriosis. All of this is unresolved trauma, which is often a fawn response, people pleasing, abandoning self for the sake of pleasing others. So this is a healthcare conversation. Individuation is about healing. That's why I left chiropractic. I was like, I can adjust these people, but I want to teach them how to become their authentic selves so that they can have secure relationships.
Can you talk about what that looked like for you and your parents? Like what
Oh my God.
how much time we
I
got?
cannot believe you're asking me this. Okay, sure.
Why?
All right,
I'm
I'll
just
tell you.
curious.
I'll tell you. I wrote 2 chapters about this in my book, but because it was so involved and heavy and long, my editors were like, "Look, we're gonna take these 2 chapters out, and that's gonna be its own book." And I was like, "Okay,
Oh,
fine."
shit.
Because this is a big thing. So after my last relationship ended, where things got physical and I was like, "What the fuck happened? I have to figure this out." I started doing healing work and I started doing somatic work, and breath work came out. And in breath work, I realized, oh my gosh, I was separated from my mother at 2. And because my mom and my twin brother came to Canada from Iran to explore immigrating, and
Without you?
without me for 3 months as a 2-year-old. Now, I don't remember that.
Yeah,
But
but you
now
feel it.
having a son,
Yeah.
when he was 2 years old, and my wife would go walking the dog around the freaking neighborhood for 15 minutes, he would lose it. "Where's mom? I'm like, "She's just walking the dog." And I just started going, "Holy crap. Shit." And he's 2 and he's reacting that way. Imagine how I was. I had some tears when I realized my 2-year-old self was separated from my mother for 3 months.
And your twin brother. I mean, I don't
And
know
my
how
twin
close you are,
brother,
but
exactly, right? And so God rest my grandmother's soul, she took care of me and there was so
yeah.
much love, but deep down, I created this resentment towards the feminine, this defensive detachment. My mom wanting connection with my mother, but always resenting her, and I didn't realize it, but I always had a resentment towards my mother, but didn't realize, but it was in my body. And so that played out in my relational dynamics, and I was kind of breaking women's hearts as a covert way of getting back at my mother.
Oh,
I didn't even
fuck.
realize that I was doing it, but I was always showing up as an asshole that just would love bomb and then all of a sudden withdraw
Wow.
and then withdraw and then these hearts are broken. Oh, Nima. And then I'd be like, there's a fucking kinky
Annoying.
twisted part of me that felt kind of like revenge against my mother. I didn't know it. This wasn't conscious. This was all the result of making the unconscious conscious. Talk about sitting in my shame when I realized all that. I was like, oh my God, holy crap. How the heck? No wonder. Whoa. There's so many of these. Whoa. No wonder in the process, right? So as I went through that and I realized after my last relationship, I was like, "Oh my God, I have to heal with my mom and dad." Because this resentment that I'm carrying and I'm acting out this dance, it's a misplaced anger towards my mother. So I did what I recommend nobody do.
An ayahuasca trip on your
No,
mother wound.
even worse.
What?
I moved back in with my mom and dad for 3 months at the age of 43. Even worse than all
I was
think about it.
I was this close to doing that,
Listen,
and I was
Jen,
like, "I don't
and
think this is good for
I
me."
talk about this, I'm like, "I wanna become trigger proof. I wanna live this, and I'm gonna do something that I don't recommend anyone do." You know how Ram Dass says, "If you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your parents."
Yes.
I went and I lived with them for 3 months after the breakdown of my last relationship where I just stopped working, and my parents were like, "Why did you leave chiropractic?" And there was this it was tumultuous, and it was like all of this years of pent-up frustration, we just got it out, and we literally I did the work that I teach now, and I basically started to take the anger and the resentment that I had because I was all in blame, "It's your fault because of you guys that I'm in these relationships." And I went from that victim stance and I just applied the trigger proof work that I teach, integrating until I got to a place where I fully understood my parents. And this concept of forgiveness was blown out of the fucking window because once you understand someone, you don't need to forgive them.
Because they just are.
They just are because now
Oh,
everyone's like, "Oh, you gotta
yeah,
forgive yourself. You gotta forgive others." Bullshit. Forgiveness is just spiritual bypass bullshit most of the time because they'll say, "I forgive you," but your body tells a
you're like,
different
"Fuck."
story,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So once I realized that understanding, I think this is a Buddhist quote. Buddha said, "Understanding understanding is the path of forgiveness." So when you understand why they did what they did, how they did it, it depersonalizes the story of I'm not good enough or I'm not worthy. And I started seeing them as humans who didn't know better when they made that move to Iran, and so there was beyond forgiveness. I didn't even have to say, "I forgive you." I didn't have to say, "I forgive myself." I just got to this level of understanding for all of it, and I have this little picture in that back. It's like the earth, right? It's called the overview effect. My methodology is called the overview method. When you're in overview and you see the totality of it, you understand everyone involved. There's no victims, there's no blaming myself. There was just understanding. And in that moment, I was like, ah, it was that moment where my dad, I remember he was like in his living room screaming at me. And screaming at me because I could see, like, he was upset with what happened with me in my last relationship, but in that moment, I stopped seeing him as this parent that was, like, hurting me, and I saw the little child in him, and I
Wow.
saw him, like, and I was like, I went up, and then as he was screaming, I just walked right up to him, and I said, "Dad, I can see how difficult this must be for you to see your son struggling through his relationships. I could see how difficult that was, and I'm sorry that you're going through that." And I gave him this big hug, and we cried, and in that moment, it felt like the movie Star Wars or Return of the Jedi when Luke Skywalker defeated Darth Vader. It was the moment where he no longer where I transcended the need for my parents' approval, and the second that I broke free from that, I felt like this weight was lifted, my relationship with them completely changed, and then the next partner that I was with was totally mature, secure. I invited them to visit my parents. My mother did her usual triangulation shit where she kind of broke a boundary, and I walked up and I said, "Mom, you're doing that again, and I really love this person. I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying if you want to be in my life moving forward, this kind of back talking and triangulating and trying to gossip with her and bring her in, it's not gonna work for me." And I was able to be very mature and elegantly boundaried, and she was like, "Okay." And that moment, I was like, "Oh, I got it." We got married. There's no push-pull dynamic. I'm not trying to act out all of my unhealed shit with my wife anymore because I've already divorced from my parents, and we have the best relationship we've ever had, and that's what individuation is. And it's an ongoing process because they're gonna when they come and visit, they're still them, they trigger me, but I'm able to work through it, and this is why it's so important and meaningful for me and why I care so much about teaching people how to do the same thing, because on the other side of that really hard, difficult, gut-wrenching work is a life where
Can be loved and love others. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
you just understand humans.
Yeah. So wait, can you tell me real quick, in your relationship, when you get triggered, you're able to easily move through it?
Yeah, we have conflict. We have conflict, we get into a rupture, we have a rupture, I think we had one yesterday. Oh my gosh. We had one yesterday, we were in the hot tub, something came up. In that moment, a little bit of a rupture happened. She got up, went up, bath Dominic, I went through my process, came down, soon as I was just like, "Hey, I just realized I took something out on you." I totally took it out on you there. That was my stuff coming through. That wasn't about you. I can totally see that your care and your questioning. I was getting defensive, and we just repaired, made love,
I was gonna say,
and
do you have the best sex after that? That
yeah,
was, like,
made love.
so
Yeah,
deep and seen.
repaired, made love, and it's like it's just ruptures happen. I'm not in fantasy land where everything we have ruptures, then we repair, and then we get on with it. But there's nothing in between us. This morning, everything's great. It's like we have our 5-year anniversary coming up in a few weeks, and with the work of becoming trigger proof, trauma bonds start off super duper hot and heavy and then they fizzle. With secure partnership, with secure relating, it doesn't necessarily start off with like, "Oh my God, love at first sight fireworks." But through the rupture repair process, you become stronger. Imagine a relationship that becomes stronger through arguments,
Oh,
through conflict,
yes.
rather than something you're like, "Oh my God," tiptoeing around, walking around eggshells. And no, you can actually get stronger through conflict, because I've mastered or mastering a process where I can go in and integrate the triggers that arise, take full responsibility, get out of my victim story, and then come back and communicate in a way where there's understanding, because we know what this is about. This is about connection, right? Rather than defending the childlike part of us and projecting it onto one another. And you can learn. You can learn how to do this.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm glad we're best friends.
Oh my God. Let's go
I'm so
shopping.
glad we're besties, because I'll be calling you
Did
up,
we
be
just
like, "I
become
div"
besties?
Yes. Be like, "Good news, I divorced my mom today. She did not like it, but no."
Yeah, there's a lot of pain, right?
Yeah.
It's choosing yourself. If you've lived a boundaryless life, Jen, and all of a sudden you're saying no, and all of a sudden having to displease somebody else and feel you have like to break free and to live a secure life, you got to tolerate a few things. You got to expand. Here, I have my little Hoberman sphere. You got to expand your capacity to be misunderstood. You got to expand your capacity to have other people say that they don't like you. Oh, the people pleaser in me is just mortified of that. And this second half of my journey, I'm not going to abandon myself for the sake of attachment. That's why I want to teach people this specialty of specializing in how to not abandon yourself. It's just how to repair from that self-abandonment that's been conditioned as a child. It's through no fault of your own.
Yeah. And I think because 'cause I've had that rupture with her already,
Your mother?
yes, in the last years, when I became a parent, that was it's just so parallel, and you're like, "Oh, I you can't love me the way like, you cannot be a mom to me in the way that I've ever needed." But, like, that was just so much for her.
Yeah. There's the guilt and the shame. There's the ego defense. They're not gonna People can't handle feedback, Jen.
But I give it
When are you gonna
freely.
learn? When are you gonna learn? Even me with my clients, I'm like, tell me if you're open to some feedback right now. Because
They're
they're
like, "No."
literally, I'm bracing myself for them to say, fuck you, Nima. I'm like, are you open to some feedback?
In my mind, that is me standing up for myself. That is me saying, "This is who I am." But it's interesting because when the response isn't what you need or it's different, I then become confused with that response and codependent in that response,
And
and
you
so I've
feel
had to.
guilty.
Yes. So I've had to give a lot of space from her, but I still kind of villainize her and haven't
There's
integrated.
some work there ahead of you.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, there is a way. It's like option A is be a doormat and say whatever, yes, whatever. Option B is to become super duper rigid, right? After you learn boundaries, you start to become rigid and you start alienating people. Luckily, there's an option C, Jen, and it's what I call becoming elegantly boundaried, where the second you get triggered, you go through a process of integration so that you're no longer a victim. You can have understanding. And then after you've integrated, you can communicate. And especially as a woman, there's this secret weapon called feminine communication, where the way that you communicate is about orienting inside your body and expressing what's happening in here rather than your being so and so, which is external type of communication. Feminine communication is really neat because I studied polarity and I was like, whoa. After my son was 6 months old, I was like, wow, we're not really, there's no
Bond? Like,
magnetism in the relationship. Then I started studying polarity. I'm like, oh, the way that I communicate can inspire devotion or push it away. And because that's just how we are, masculine and feminine, it's within us. And we can and it's a charge, it's an energy that we can work together. And so using feminine communication, when you kind of sit and go, Mom, can I share how I'm feeling?
she'll be like, "No."
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding.
If she says no, then you're like, okay, then you flow your energy away and you don't try to offer it because your feelings are a gift. You have to approach that your feelings, your inner world is a gift. And they are. This is when I teach women about this is like to a healthy masculine man, your feelings shared vulnerably is an absolute gift. But you have been conditioned to think that they're a burden. So you don't share them, or when you share them, it's in with resentment or it's laced with judgment and blame, and then that's not received well. Then you're like, oh, see, there I go. I share my feelings, and then this is what I get. Fuck that. Why do I even bother? Right?
Yes,
And so
yes.
it validates the story of I'm too much, right? So there is a way where you can actually, can I share how I'm feeling? I'm using feminine communication, by the way. Can I share how I'm feeling? I'm feeling some sadness because, I can see that you're really wanting so and so, but the way that I'm experiencing it is so and so. And what I need is a little bit for you to be more gentle. What I need is for you to so and so. Can I get some help with that? See, there's no penetration, there's no judgment, and there's no blame. And so, human beings who have egos, there's nothing for them to defend when you use that. So, there is a refinement, there is a training where you can become elegant in your boundaries, where you can get whatever you want from people because you're not pushing, you're not needing, you're not abandoning yourself. You're showing up with the ultimate self-worth that you deserve to receive love, care, attention, affection. You first got to get to that. That takes some recovery. Then you can then communicate that in a way where you will be met and received with absolute love.
Yeah, I love that. And even if like the response doesn't come the way that you want, just being able to do that for yourself feels really good. Like I fucking handled that, and I'm so proud of myself.
Yep.
And I
Yep.
think
It's
that's
like when I first started dating my wife, I was in the player mode and I was dating many women and she just already had it within her. And she was like, "Oh, you're dating other people." Well, she found out after a while that I was, seeing other people. And she said, "Oh," I said, "What is it?" She says, "I really, really like you. And I want the person that I'm with to like me as much as I like you.
ooh, that's
And I
good.
understand if you're not ready for that, but I can't be in that environment.
Oof,
And so
what
I'm
a
gonna have to."
badass.
And so
Mm, I love her.
I was like, "Wait, what?" And so I was, she just it's like, "Okay, I'll try this monogamy thing for a while, for a month. Let's see how it goes." And so here we are, right?
Oh,
And so
yeah.
what I saw in her was so different than any other woman was that she was orienting her communication inward rather than playing the victim and pointing fingers and in judgment and blame. And that is an art to do for human beings, not just women, but men as well. But getting out of the identity of entitlement and victimhood because we've all been hurt in some way, right? And we've hurt others in ways. To get to understanding, to get to a sense of self-worth, and then communicate in a way where it inspires the opposite sex or inspires other people to work with you. And that level of vulnerability, that level of healing, that level of inspiration is possible. And that's the good news if you're willing to become trigger proof.
Yeah, I love it. Oh my gosh, this has been the best conversation. Thank you for helping me. Thank you for letting me
It's
cry.
so awesome. Yeah, I love it.
Can you tell everybody where to find you, your books, your offers?
What I'd love to do is the best place to begin, I'm gonna leave a link in your show notes, and that's the attachment style quiz.
Perfect.
Okay,
Yep.
I'm gonna leave a quiz, and the best place to start is filling out the survey that will tell you what your attachment style is. And once you know that, you have a base, you have a foundation, right? So the link is in the bio, but you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Nima. Um, uh, my drnima.com. I mean, sure, I'm just going to provide you
Give
all
it
the
all.
links. I'm
Give
going
me
to
your
give all the
books.
links, but the best place to begin is to do the attachment style survey. And then I'm easy to connect with. Send me an email. Let me know if you have any questions, what you thought of the podcast, the interview. And if you have any other questions, I'm here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is going to be such a great episode. I know I got a lot out of it. So
Awesome. Thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you so much for listening to our show. I hope you appreciate our honest conversations around attachment, relationships, and please know that you're not alone. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.